I have this rack mount case, and I'm going to be gutting this and replacing its present processor and a motherboard with a AMD 3900X. Hi, I'm BrendaEM. Welcome to my channel. This is still a new shop space. When I actually start the doing of things part of the video, there won't be so much echo because the camera will be closer. I use this computer for making, of course, for YouTube videos. I also do rendering on it and a little bit of science stuff. And part of this computer project was made possible by donations of people like you, and I appreciate that because this channel is not monetized. What might help that is just watching some videos. If I get enough of playtime, then and enough of subscribers, then I'll get monetized. Anyway, this is a rack mount case, and generally this lives in a plastic roto-molded case, so it can be portable. That was one of the requirements. One of the things I wanted for this, I wanted to be able to bring this from place to place and use it. And I also looked at getting a new laptop, and you know, the problem is laptops still can't handle the heat. You spend $3,000 for a laptop and it still throttles, and I'm not very happy about that. And so for doing my kind of thing, and I have this machine for doing it. I'd like it to be 3 rack spaces, but 4 it is for now. I did a video on this case, and that'll be linked on the side. I just painted it and did some light mods on it and stuff like that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up and I'll show you quickly what's in here, and then I'll gut it, and then we'll start the build. So this case, generally in front, it's got a 120 millimeter fan in front here. It has I've added a 120 millimeter fan here. This is actually 3D printed. It didn't come out that good, but I wanted an ABS specimen in order to, for, you know, heat stability, but visually it cost me. I might make a PLA one. Since I built this computer, I took the drive out of here and I moved it down here, and anyway, I replaced this one with a Roswell, and it seems, what I like is that they're USB 3. It still has a CF card thing. I don't need that. I also blocked off the case here, so no air gets ejected out of the front of the case. The case has basically been pretty good otherwise. Right now, it's about 77% humidity in this room. Still try to be at 1 with your computer, especially if you're in a dry area or a dry time of year. If you're in a dry area, it would be best to wear a static routing strap. I just don't think that that I'm going to get much static in 78% humidity. So basically in here, you've got a card holder. This is a GTX 1080. I have some old solid state drives. There's a certain amount of dust. The inside of the case actually has indoor-outdoor carpeting. You can see the dust on it. I use this thing. Has indoor-outdoor carpeting on the sides of the case and wherever I can put it. And it's flame-proof or flame-resistant carpet, so I'm not too worried about that. And you have to worry about the buildup in the case, but still it makes the inside of the case quieter. And so presently I have an HX850 in here. The motherboard was an MSI motherboard. It has lasted wonderful. This motherboard is now 8 years old. The little thing in front didn't last 1 year. So I have some Silent X fans, and then I don't feel like they put out enough. As you can see, I tend to tie this stuff up now more zip ties. So I'm gonna blow this out with compressed air, and I'll disassemble it. Most PC power supplies are put in by 4 screws going around the perimeter, and there might be adapter rings like there is on this. And let's get this tightened in. This is a difficult exposure, but I usually try to put these fairly snug. Don't strip them out. You also might think about putting some little foam pads if you have some high density foam. Maybe put them inside, keep it from scratching against the side of the computer. This computer also has 2 additional screws to keep the power supply from falling forward, and which is good for a heavy power supply like this. And this is a portable computer, so, well, luggable computer, so I like the extra security. I made this custom 3D printed fan bracket because this case only came with one for the other side. There's a little cover here for to glue in a little filter, which I haven't found some good material for. Right now I'm running a Silent X fan. I want a little more cooling in here, and I'm going to take it out and put this Noctua fan in here and see how that works. And the color's, well, interesting. In this case, there's a bunch of little screws to hold in things. And generally on these fans, there's usually a little thing on here somewhere that shows which way the air blows out. And it's generally the side with the label, but not always. On this, I am running a little fan guard because I once got hit by one of these fans. I got it, and it hurt, and it got me pretty bad. And oddly, it got me on my knuckle, not the tip of my finger, but on my knuckle. And I'm not used to getting the back of my fingers cut up like that. These little fan guards are cheap. I like just the wire ones. I don't like the fancy laser cut ones because I think they're more restrictive. I mean, realistically, a fan guard like this will hardly affect the flow any. This particular fan has these little removable corners, and they thoughtfully give you this little thing here that has it's kind of an alternative corner scenario that has a little bit of extra rubber on it for the edges here, and it might help it seal a little bit better. They also included these little rubber nubby things, and these things work under a lot of situations, but for this particular application, I don't think they're going to work good because the plastic they're going through is thick, and it's made for, like, this is thick here, and it's made for a thin sheet metal on the other side, and I'd have to cut off the nubbies, and they'd be one-use or single-use things anyhow, so I think I'm just going to use the self-tapping screws. This is the fan mounted in this little custom 3D printed thing. If you'd like a copy of this, I think I'll probably put it in the description. If you don't see it there, remind me. It's possible. I've got a lot of stuff going on right now. It's possible that I forgot it. I tried to make this particular grill out of ABS, and I think maybe the grill itself could be PLA. Maybe this whole thing could be PLA. I just don't like a lot of PLA in my computer case. The inside of the grill has a little inset right here, so you can put a little piece of filter material, and of course you wouldn't want to block it off too much. On the sides here, you can see that there's you can see little glue spots, and there's 3mm nuts, and they're just epoxied in. And generally, when I do this, I also thread a fastener in here. Just to make sure that you know, the threads don't get you know, clogged up, and I keep on turning it from now and then. Maybe even wipe off this screw of acetone to make sure the threads are clean, because I don't like stuff like this dropping in the case, because this could short out your computer and ruin your motherboard and processor. And generally, when I do this, I chase these threads with a tap, usually held in a portable drill carefully. And I don't run it too fast because it'll just melt the plastic anyhow. And be careful not to break it. It's only 3mm. And in this particular case, this fan bracket just goes inside this little thing here. And it could fit in a lot of, mini desktops and stuff like that have 3 half-height bays in it. This case was originally painted with lacquer paint. It's got a couple little nicks on the inside, but I'm not going to touch it up right now. Before I populate this motherboard with RAM, before I put the heatsink on, before it gets heavy, I'm going to take a look at the motherboard and see how well these little posts line up with the motherboard. I'm glad I did a check of the standoffs, because in this case, this particular standoff can't be used. If I hold the manual this way, you can see that that this isn't circled. And the reason why it's not circled is because when they designed this pointy thing here, they covered up one of the screw holes needlessly. Looking at the back of the motherboard, the screw holes still exist there, but as you can see, I have the cover off, and they could have drilled just a little, they could have put just a little bit of a hole here, and this would be still strong enough to do this, and we could have still secured this motherboard with an additional mounting screw. And this is right next to the PCI. I would like that this screw be here. Also, these things do rattle. This is not nice. So I don't know. I don't know if it's a tolerance issue. They could have put a little piece of foam here, and maybe I'll shim these so it won't make noise. But that could actually buzz. Although these have some mass to them. I don't know how tight they are presently, but they're fairly tight. and they still buzz on this side. Also, I've noticed that in as much as the extra stuff they gave me with the motherboard, I wish they included some motherboard mounting screws, and especially the little fiber or plastic washers that we generally put to hold these things down. We have a situation on this motherboard where we have 2 memory channels, and I have 2 sticks of memory. And according to the manual, the dual inline memory modules are numbered A1, A2, B1, and B2. I imagine for the channels respectively. So they've got some old-fashioned looking memory chips here where we have chips without any kind of heat spreader. So in the manual, it looks like it'd be easy to figure out which way to put in the memory. But because we have heat spreaders on this memory, the only way you can tell is by this center notch, which is a little bit off center. So I rotated this around so I've got the closer side here. And that would mean that all these pictures are lined up. So the one I want to use apparently is this or this. Fortunately, they actually have a YouTube thing here. And for those who actually like QR codes, there's one here. I don't really care for them. I don't like links that don't have real world text in them, that aren't human readable. This is not, I mean, for inventory control, that's fine, but I don't like QR codes. You can, if you don't like it, you can post in your comments. Tell all your friends, will you? Anyway, so I'm hoping this is okay. So actually, I think it was Linus who said the box is a good surface for installing memory, and it's fairly firm. If it wants to flex, I'll put it on something firmer. And I want something to protect the motherboard. Also, I don't want to stress the motherboard. Often it takes a certain amount of force to put these memory modules in there. So I'm looking at this once again just to make sure and stuff. Like I have a notch here. I have a notch bias to this side. Obviously, you open up these things to put in your memory modules. I'm not going to touch the memory module itself, not the pins if you don't have to. I don't even want to be close to the pins or any pin on the motherboard if I don't have to. And so, yeah, as it says, it's A2 and B2 should be with this inverted. Well, actually, it's inverted for you, but this seems, for me, the motherboard's inverted. I usually look at the motherboards the other way around. Notwithstanding, let's try putting the memory modules. So, and this is Corsair Vengeance LPX. Oddly, I'm going to take off these little plastic things off the memory, not because it'll look better, but because it'll just take and let a little more heat out. And I take it and I put it in here and make sure once again that make sure that the plastic isn't in the way. And then so when I put it in there, I just put it and make sure and just rock it into place, and it snapped pretty well. So, and once again, I don't want to touch the memory modules. Yesterday, I believe it was 78% humidity here, and it's generally damp. So static's not the biggest thing. Obviously, in the summer in this area, it would be different. And I'm placing the second memory module. And I try to be kind of pedantic about this, you know. There we go. And I give them just a little squeeze on the edge to make sure they're fully seated. Generally, you should wear a grounding strip, and at the very least, be at one with what you're working on. As long as it's safe, find something that's got some, find some metal on, like say this motherboard. This is probably this heat pipe is probably grounded. Find some metal and be at one with the motherboard. Actually, this is a grounded part of the motherboard. Although it's possible if you had a big static charge that a spark could jump, a certain amount of distance. So be careful. And if you think you have a static problem, then you need to deal with that. Static is an issue, but it's about 83% relative humidity in here today. So I'm not too worried about static. Which comes time for the processor. And I've walked and I'm actually come back to this computer. I'm going to touch this reel again, maybe this screw, and then finally this little ground tab on the motherboard to be at one with it. These are zero insertion force sockets. Actually, this is socket AM4. And when they say zero insertion force, there shouldn't be any force that you need to apply to push this into where it has to go. Basically, gravity should do it. There's a little bail here, and take that. I actually picked it up with my fingernail, but pick it up. And now comes the hard part. So generally, I'm looking at the motherboard manual and looking at the motherboard. So there's a little black triangle here, There's also a little round circle. And I kind of, when I'm doing stuff like this, and if I don't want to make a mistake, I generally use more than one reference. So this jives with this. So I've got this, so the bail's on this side, it's on this side of the manual. So I'm pretty sure now that this, I've got two sources here. That this is the magic triangle right here. On the processor, there's also a little triangle right there. So what I know what I need to do is flip it like this. And there's also a little tiny triangle, but I'm going to peek again. And I don't like lifting these things up. Make sure it's a triangle, and it should just sit on here with no force. And that it does. And then look around the sides right now. I'm looking around the sides, and it seems pretty much down there. And rocks just a little bit, which is interesting. But I have because the pins went in 99% of the way, I feel confident that it could take a few grams of pressure while I activate the spring clamp, and that should do it. Now comes the CPU's heatsink, and what I did is I looked in the motherboard manual, and I found out that this is CPU fan. Oddly enough, it's labeled, but you can barely see it. So I think that I'm going to want, if possible, I'm going to want this to be on this side so this cable will reach. And so let's do that. And this always gets me a little, nervous too, as well it should, because these things apply a lot of pressure to the motherboard. And it's kind of an over-centered cam thing, and I'm trying to make sure that it's as open can be, which seems to be this way. So I'll try to situate it on here. Like so. And this is the first one of this particular socket I've ever done. So this particular heatsink just barely fits through between these two little slots and this little hold down thingy. And I'm going to need to lean in a little bit to get this attached. Like so. That's one end. And there's a little bit of spring pressure, even when it's open. There, it's open. And now if I pull it over center, it puts down a lot of pressure, and it's held on now. Now it's on. And while I'm here, I'm going to hook up the CPU fan, which only fits one way apparently. There we go. And I'll probably put a little zip tie in here somewhere. We could just stuff that like that for now. And I get nervous doing this because this is a precision thing. There's billions of parts in the processor. There's billions of parts in the memory. And now we're being brutish with it to hold down to make sure there's a nice thermal contact between these two parts here. And just be careful. And like I had to push this down a little bit, but it was only with like a dozen grams or an ounce or two, just to make sure. If you have to push down too hard, this clip is probably open. Now I'll try to get this thing in here, and generally the heatsink's pretty heavy. This motherboard is heavy too, so I want to grab it by both. The other motherboard was fairly light, so, and I don't want to drag it on the little posts, on the little standoffs. So I don't want to ever drag it anywhere because that's very bad luck. There, and it seems to be situated on. And I did remove the post from under here, so there won't be a screw location there. Generally, when I put in my motherboards, I generally use either a fiber or a little plastic washer to protect the top of the surface of the motherboard. And often I pull the little screwdriver bit out of a tool if you don't have a long screwdriver. And I use one finger to hold the screw onto the tip of the screwdriver and just drop it in the hole and twirl it down, and I leave all the screws loose until I'm done, and then I tighten them all. This screw I generally use to tie down things. I actually have a replacement screw to hold down a wire tie to hold some of the cables here from vibrating. there is a power and reset here, which is handy. So it's going to be interesting to see where the USB and USB 3 things are. Hopefully there's a USB 3 thing down here somewhere, and we shall see. I think it's really important to read the motherboard manual, find out where all the headers are. They might have changed even from the last revision, and unless you've put in a bunch of these of the same exact kind, I really recommend checking every connection that you make on the motherboard. My application has an external card reader from Roswell, which they actually thoughtfully provided enough a cable for. And on my particular motherboard, I'm actually checking, there's a key notch there. I've checked the manual, and this goes right in here like this, like so. And I'm gonna keep on working all these cables, and I don't know exactly which order I'm gonna do them in. I imagine the motherboard power cables will be next, and eventually everything will be tied together. I've rounded up the ATX motherboard power, and I've also rounded up two of these CPU connectors, and I'm going to connect them to the power supply and then the motherboard. Generally when I'm doing cables, I don't try to over constrain the cables. I kind of let the cables do what they want to do to some degree. And I try to reinforce cables from other cables to keep the vibration down in the case as you're handling it. In my application, I'm using this Corsair HX850, and it actually has a fully modular setup. And my other one didn't. My other one, the ATX, main ATX power connector, was integrated. So I had to look in the manual, and actually you can see I do look at the manuals and that kind of thing to see how they do it. And I'm going to hook up this end first, and I might get in the way, so I don't know if I'll keep the rest of the shot. But looking on here, there's we'll put in this guy first, and there's actually little latches to make sure it stays connected. It's actually bad luck if they come unconnected. Like so. And I'll look and see where this key is for the ATX power connector. Like so. Make sure I've got all the things lined up. Once it starts, I'm actually going to try to reach underneath the edge of the motherboard, support the motherboard a little bit. Like so. And it's not quite down yet. I don't want to push too hard on this with it being unsupported. There we go, I believe it's latched, like so. I noticed that this cable had like a twist, half twist in it, and it put undue stress in it, and now it's kind of happier. And I don't know how I'm gonna tie up all this. I think I'm gonna tie this up to the cage. This computer does need to be portable, or at least luggable. And I didn't disconnect it from the motherboard. I disconnected it from the power supply, and I put a little loop of surplus right over here. On this motherboard, there's two CPU cables. It's a really good review of this particular motherboard as far as its electrical characteristics, especially its voltage regulation and everything like that. And I'll link it, because I think it's a good review if you're interested in this exact motherboard. Also, I did a review of this case, and also I modded it. I just painted it and actually made it a little quieter using the same technique as before, where I generally line the thing up and get it started. And if I can, I try to support the motherboard, but not so. But I don't really want to make electrical contact with the motherboard. I just want to grab the edge. It's bad luck to make electrical contact with the motherboard. These wire ties, generally you should not use these in your computer for anything. First, they're metal. If they melted for any reason, they'd short out and make your problem worse. And also they cause little inductive problems. That's why you shouldn't use them in your motherboard. So save them for other things. And I'm sure you have a lot of things that they'd be useful, but you shouldn't put them inside of the computer as far as I'm concerned. And generally, I guess that it's easier to work and pull the wrinkles out of the cables from the motherboard side, working elsewhere. I'm not going for a big change as far as ventilation. I don't think that arranging the cables is going to help me as far as ventilation. But when I get done, I want these cables not to be pulling on the connectors. As it's being tipped and stuff like that. Like I said, this is kind of a luggable portable computer. I used to use a lot of zip ties in computers. I'm finding Velcro a lot nicer to work with. I think aesthetically it looks nicer. It doesn't dig into the cables. You can make changes. It's more economical. It's more ecological too, and it can be reused. You buy a little roll like this, you cut off little pieces, and like these CPU auxiliary power connectors for the CPU. Like I put one here, and so far. And the thing is, you can change it, and as you're doing your changing out your hardware and doing little upgrades and stuff. It can evolve, and even if you run out of this stuff, you could just cut it in half and you'll have more. And because generally it's thicker than it needs to be. And I didn't get this too tight, but and that's another thing, you don't have to worry about it being too tight, and it just makes more sense, you know, if it's your own computer. And I could see if you only have a couple minutes or something. And once again, I don't want to pull on this too much. Basically, I want one cable to help another stay relatively still. And you see they dampen each other, and that's what I'm going for. I also try to keep like cables together, like these two CPU power connectors. So that way, as an idea, you can see that there's two things and they're kind of running together. And so you can see that they might do a similar function. There's a minimum bend radius thing. I'm not a big fan of mingling cables if you don't have to. And to some degree, they'll do I kind of let them do kind of what they want to do. You know, it's of course you got, like in this case, I've got to keep this one out of the fan. I don't want this above the fan. I want these together. I'm not going for a visual appearance other than it should look neat and tidy enough to understand, and they should be kind of, when I get done, it should kind of be like a web, like a mesh. Reticulated, if you will. I have most of the power and SATA cables installed. It's a little ugly here because I have a slim CD, DVD, Blu-ray drive, and it takes a little power adapter and powered SATA adapter actually. The MSI SATA cables that came with this motherboard, I don't like them because they're plasticky. I mean, these are really stiff and plasticky, like I actually worry about the sockets. You can see, I can actually see the socket actually in the corner of the motherboard moving just by doing this. Also on this motherboard, there's one little cable here, which I think is for the chipset fan. I hate this cable here, and I imagine they're going to have a lot of returns with this motherboard because this little connector is just in the way. It's too small, too fragile, and too much in the way. In this particular installation, I wish this USB connector was more back. I actually had to open up this little sheathing I had for the cables right here. I believe this is a USB right here. I'm not sure, but this would be a USB 3 and not 2 like I have in the front of the case. I tried to kind of keep all of this together, so like if I drop it, you don't really see any cables moving. I also put a bit of loose Velcro right here just to pull this away from the processor. I don't want the cables touching the processor because that will actually affect the thermal interfacing. I try to keep the cables away from the memory, not only for heat, but really because these connectors are very high density, memory timing and everything electrically is really difficult for them to get right in the first place. I don't want to antagonize it. There's plenty of fan headers, and these are 4-pin fan headers. And I'm hoping that I can control them from the UEFI slash BIOS. And like I said, I tried to keep this together. And also, when you use Velcro, you can kind of change your scheme as you go along. So I found that this CPU fan cable worked out pretty good here. I can't attach this to the power supply because, you know, I don't want the fan hitting the Velcro. So it's not beautiful. I'm not going for beauty. I'm going for reliability. And there's, you know, like what flexes. If you need to bend that cable when doing this, try to isolate the bend that you're doing from the connector. So like if I want to bend this like this, just held it here so the connector is not under strain. This video card is about a 1.5 years old GTX 1080. It's not an RTX, but still it's a competent video card for doing the kind of stuff I do. I blew this card out with an air compressor. There was a lot of dust in it, and a lot of dust that even the canned air couldn't get because there's not enough of flow. And the one thing to watch out for when you're working on computers is the fans. If you blow out a lot of compressed air in the fan, it could wind up the fan fast enough that it might be able to create enough voltage to hurt something on the card, like the fan regulator or what have you. If this fan was made to run, say, on 12 volts, for instance, and at 1,000 RPM, and if I put a lot of compressed air in here, it could get the fan up to, say, 2,000 RPMs, and it could generate maybe 24 volts, which would be really bad. So generally, when I blow out computers, I gently and very gently, and you have to be careful not to get hurt through doing this, but what I do is very gently put my finger against the fan, and what I do is blow it out like that, and that way the fan is pretty much still. Sometimes you can't hold the fan still, and if that's the case, you have your compressed air or air compressor, just give it very short shots so the fan doesn't wind up. If you hear the fan winding up, you could be doing damage, and I would rather not do that, especially on a video card that costs a fair amount of money. So I'm handling the video card and trying not to touch the edge card connector. The thing to remember is once you put a video card in, it locks down, and there's usually a release somewhere here to unlock it. I'm sliding down this, and it looks like my little cabling over here, the video card will bump into it. Having lunged down and resituated the cables over here, it looks like it's clear, and I just go around the corners. So I think I'm ready to put this thing in here. And I'm trying to use the back plane of the computer, if there was one, to kind of guide the card down. And it looks like I might have a little bit of, no, there we go. It used to be that we used to put at least one card in the back of the computer to make sure that everything is situated before we tighten down the motherboard screws. So let's put in the screws for it. And once again, I'm using this technique. It's really handy. Just use one finger. There's also screwdrivers that have little clasps for those really bad situations, but I haven't ran into anything that was really that terrible in this so far. This particular case has this little accessory to help hold down the video card and transport and that kind of thing. Or given it was a rack mount case, I don't know exactly what they're using it for. I also cut a little piece of old mouse pad, and I use it under here just to cushion it a little bit and to make sure it grips. And fortunately, this is where it was before. We have a little round head screw for that, so it looks nice. I'm installing the PCIe cable for the graphics card. This particular graphics card takes a single 8-pin connector, and sometimes these are split, so you can use it for 6 pins and so forth. And you kind of gotta put them together and make sure that they go in and don't force them. Basically, they should slide in there pretty easily up into the point where it clicks, like so. And there's little tabs that kind of hooks on there, so it acts as one piece. Actually, I'm going to support the video card. There we go. And I have the PCI Express cable installed for the video card. You can see the cables get to be a little bit much at times because there's no back panel for this computer and there's no basement either. I think I have all the cables in. I tucked this under here with a little bit of Velcro and situated this up. So actually I'm going to put one here too, just because. That's not good. Well, you know what I should do? Perhaps I should turn on the power switch. Let's see if it'll come up. I'm watching the LED display inside doing its thing. It's doing lots of stuff. I don't see any video though. $64, $98. Oh, it looks like the video's coming up. The fans are chilling out a little bit. Hey, we got something. Ah, well, all right then. So I'm not going to go through all this BIOS and stuff. So far, let's see what we have. We have a CPU speed of 3.8 gigahertz. We have a DDR speed of 266. I don't know, the RAM I have in there is 3400. I don't know if that's the actual RAM. I don't know if that's the actual RAM speed. Maybe I've got to set up the RAM. So I've got to go through a lot of settings, and a lot of this is really depending on what motherboard you have. And so I'm going to go through here and set up the fans, which in front seem to be working, so that's good news. And so far, I'm cautiously optimistic right now. And also, in the front of the computer, I've got a copy of Microsoft Windows, the installer on USB. So that'd be my first order after setting up all the UEFI. To tell you the truth, I don't really like all this graphical stuff. I actually like the text-based stuff. I feel that the more stuff you put in there, the less reliable it's going to be. And so I'm going to set this up, and we're probably going to work a while, set this up, and see if I can see if I can get a Windows installation on it. I had to wipe out my partition. Also, I had problems with Adobe 5.5 with the deauthorizing program not working. So I've got I think there's help for that, but we shall see.